This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth. I'm glad to have you joining us today because we've got a great show lined up for you. So let's just jump right into it. Joining us on the line is the one and only Mark Anderson of American Free Press, a man who's been tracking the Bilderberg for, gosh, I don't even know, probably a few decades. He's actually the protege of the one and only, the late, great Jim Tucker, who is pretty much why a lot of us know about Bilderberg in the first place. So Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here today at Press for Truth. Now, I want to get some of your views on what you think some of the agendas might be at this year's meeting. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the potential location. You've been doing a little bit of digging, some classic sleuthing, and you've found some interesting things. Tell us about what you know about the potential location this year.
Well, ever since the Serbian government leaked in January of this year through Prime Minister Ana Brnabić, I want to say that right, she had been at the World Economic Forum, and that, of course, happens in Davos in January each year, and she got tapped by Bilderberg. She got invited, and via that, because of that, I'm just reviewing a little recent history, the Serbian government, not thinking much about it, just published the fact that she was invited and that Bilderberg would take place June 7 through 10, evidently in Turin, Italy, which is in northern Italy. And so that's the general location. And I have no reason, and other researchers have no reason to necessarily doubt that. But that's where the initial leak came from, through the Serbian government.
So they literally leaked it by publishing the fact that she was invited, and that's how we know it's in Italy.
Yeah, I don't think that they would have any reason to misrepresent where it's going to take place. I think they just matter-of-factly published it, maybe because they were proud she was invited after having contributed to some basic programs at the World Economic Forum. So I don't doubt Italy. But to answer your question better, they said Turin, Italy, and of course, you and I have both, Dan, looked at this NH Torino Hotel in Turin, and it's a 4-star hotel. It doesn't have the Bilderberg golf course and some of the amenities. Then again, when they met in Denmark in 2014, they met in a very kind of industrial-looking Marriott hotel along a body of water in Copenhagen, and there was no golf course there either. So the Torino Hotel in Turin seems like it's of sufficient luxury, you might say, for these one-worlders. But then there was some other rumors floating around that it could be the JW Marriott in Venice, which is a significantly nicer hotel, a 5-star compared to the 4-star in Turin. And they both have no availability on the dates June 7 through 10 or maybe June 6 through 11. So the top two candidates are the Torino in Turin and the JW Marriott in Venice.
Why do you think both hotels are fully booked up for those same days? Do you think it's about throwing people for a loop or just trying to make it a little more tricky for us to figure out?
It could be. Of course, Venice is an extremely popular tourist spot. For all we know, the hotels are heavily booked all summer long. So that's not necessarily indicative of anything. Since I know the country and we know the country, I'm not real key on finding out the hotel quite yet. I mean, I'm going to find out as soon as possible. I think I'll know by Monday. But it really seems to boil down between that one in Turin and the other in Venice. I'm thinking that the Serbian government, so far I'm thinking that they had no reason to fabricate that and that it was just an innocent thing, and it revealed at least the city and the country. And so the Torino Hotel, it's in the former Fiat automotive building. Fiat has been connected corporately, to some of the high roller meetings like Bilderberg and Trilateral. So it's, a pretty good chance that it'll be that hotel in Turin, but you can't rule out the other. Venice is about 160 miles east of Turin, something like that, about like driving across lower Michigan, give or take a little bit. So we'll see which one it is, but it shouldn't be too hard to nail down here within the next 3 to 5 days.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I gave both hotels a call today to inquire about this, and when I called the Marriott, I'll play it now for people. This is what they had to say when I gave them a call. Check it out.
Thank you for calling Marriott. This is Angela. How can I help you?
Hi, I'm hoping to book a room at the Marriott, but I'm not sure if I've got the right one here. I'm trying to reach the Marriott Venice Resort and Spa.
Okay, one moment here. What day were you looking to come?
June 7th to 10th.
Okay, I'm not showing any rates in our system for this location. I'm going to place you on a brief hold and see if I can't find out why, okay?
Okay, thanks.
One moment, yep. Okay, thank you so much for holding. I did speak to my supervisor, and for those dates, we are completely sold out for that time at that location. That's why nothing's popping up for me.
Okay, totally sold out. Wow, all right.
Were you looking at possibly different dates?
No, I'm kind of needing those days because I'm supposed to be attending a conference. I just wanted to make sure I was going to be going to the right place. Do you know if there is a conference there?
I can certainly take a look. What's the name of the conference?
Well, I'm hoping you can tell me so I make sure that I'm getting this right.
You would have to tell me the name of the conference for me to even look that up.
Okay. It's Bilderberg.
Would it be under a different name perhaps? Because I'm not showing a conference for those dates under that name.
Oh, okay. Nothing listed for Bilderberg?
No.
Okay.
If they have a room block set up, I'm not showing it.
Right. All right. I'll look around. Thanks, though.
You're welcome, and thank you for calling Marriott.
So as you can see, she didn't really have a whole lot of information, but she did know that the entire thing was booked out. However, I got a little bit of a more interesting response when I called the Turin Hotel, which is why I'm leaning in that direction. Here's what they had to say.
Then go to Congress in Turin. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one.
Which date, please?
June 7th to 10th.
It's overbooked, this hotel. Then go to Congress from the 7th of June till the 10th. There are no rooms available.
The whole thing's booked for those days?
In Lingoto Congress, yes.
Okay.
I will check for you maybe
well, I'm trying to...
in Ambassador.
Do you know if... I just want to make sure I'm going to the right place. Do you know, is there a conference at that hotel on those days?
I can check it for you.
Thank you.
You have a conference over there?
Yeah.
Do you have the name of this congress?
Yeah, it's called Bilderberg.
Maybe I transfer you directly to the hotel. Maybe they know exactly, yes?
Yeah,
Just
sure.
one moment, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm trying to make a reservation there for
Yes.
in June. I was just speaking to someone. They transferred me, and I'm trying to find out if I'm going to the right place, if there's a conference happening in June.
Well, we can't actually give you this information.
Oh. Okay, because
yes, we're not allowed to give, these are internal information, so we're not allowed to do so. But if you need to go and speak with the reservation office, you can try and dial the same number that you have done now, and we're going to pass it through the reservation office tomorrow morning from 9 till 6.
Oh, okay. All right then, thank you.
If not, you can try on Monday.
Okay, thanks. So as you can see, they seem to have known a little bit more than they did over at the Marriott. So perhaps they know something there. What do you think?
Yeah, when I called there, I got much the same response. It was a lot of stammering and telling me a bunch of things that he really wasn't supposed to say. So rather than no or I don't know, it was like, well, I understand that, well, maybe I'll have you talk to somebody else, kind of like that, indicating that this younger associate of the hotel probably wasn't supposed to say and therefore didn't know what to say.
Right. All right. So we're zeroing in on Turin, Italy. Again, once we have official confirmation, we'll let everyone know. But moving forward, let's get into some of the things that may potentially be on the agenda this year. I know last year Donald Trump was a pretty big topic, and the Russians were in fact a pretty big topic. Do you think those are also going to make their way onto the agenda this year and perhaps lead the discussion?
Yeah, I believe they will to a degree. Of course, they have their official list, as you know, Dan. And I'm not saying none of us have ever said that they don't discuss what's on the official list, but we've all understood quite clearly that it's not going to be limited to what's on the official list. One thing is that the Council on Foreign Relations President Richard Haass recently addressed the House of Lords, led by Lord Howell. And it was an on-the-record meeting, but it was not widely publicized. And what Richard Haass was talking about was pretty candid and a pretty sober assessment of Donald Trump, in his view, pulling out of not just the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Paris Agreement like happened last year, right around the time that Bilderberg met in June in Chantilly, Virginia again. That's when that stuff had happened, right around that time. But also having serious doubts, Mr. Trump, about NAFTA and even about the WTO. Politico had an article that Trump would want to assert himself at the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in such a way where we would sort of override their arbitration, and the U.S. would try and sort of run the show. And if the U.S. couldn't run the show, the U.S. was going to bail on the WTO altogether. Richard Haass, in addressing the Lords panel, expressed these fears, and he sounded very sincere. I didn't detect any double talk or Orwellian doublespeak, that he's very concerned that Trump, even, despite his flaws, and a lot of us understand that he's not the perfect patriot or the ultimate constitutionalist. He's pretty dodgy. He can be very volatile and indecisive at times, but this CFR head, of course, the CFR being well represented at Bilderberg, is very concerned that because the United States has such a big footprint in things like NATO and at the WTO and, of course, in NAFTA, because that's only U.S., Canada, Mexico, if the U.S. pulls out with all its prestige and power out of all these post-World War institutions, that all these institutions will be in a state of flux with either less or no U.S. participation. So, as you know, Dan, the post-World War II system that was set up at Bretton Woods is very important to Bilderberg, the Bretton Woods Agreement, and that's the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, and this comprises what they call the liberal world order, or the rules-based liberal world order. It's very important to them. It's the touchstone of the current phase of one world government. And without these institutions, they become very disoriented. And if the U.S. isn't prominent in these institutions, then, as Richard Haass told the panel of Lords, well, we're going to have to find some other nation or coalition of nations that would replace the U.S. if the U.S. either pulls back or pulls out of all these institutions, WTO, IMF, World Bank, all the post-World War II stuff, the Bretton Woods stuff. And that includes NAFTA. So Richard Haass is wondering, will there be a NAFTA 2.0? Will there be a TTIP 2.0, a TPP 2.0 without the U.S., going down from 12 members down to 11? So this seems to be a very broad concern. You got the House of Lords and the CFR chief talking about it. CFR and House of Lords members, of course, have been to Bilderberg numerous times. This seems almost a dead ringer for what they're going to be concerned about, and that's who will replace the U.S. if Trump is sincere and really diminishes the U.S. role in this liberal world order that came out of World War II. This seems to be a really big thing. And Haass didn't sound like he was being disingenuous, Dan. He sounded like he was truly concerned that Trump would have enough nads or tenacity to pull back enough to where they'd have to find somebody else to sort of head the table at all these outlets.
Well, it seems to me that he's also kind of flip-flop, if you will, on the Syrian issue. On the campaign trail, he said they're not going in there, and then under Rex Tillerson, they said they are going in there, and now recently he said they're pulling out again and necessarily don't want to go in there. But this seems in direct contrast to what Bilderberg wants. So, how do you figure that plays out when it comes to Bilderberg's plans for the Middle East?
That's a tough one, Dan. That's when I referred to Trump as being volatile and unpredictable. You're nailing it, exactly what I meant. I'm a non-interventionist, but now I'm going to intervene. I don't want to be part of Syria because we shouldn't be so sticking our nose in other people's business. But now we're going into Syria. I'm going to hire this guy and I'm going to fire him tomorrow. He's went through the highest turnover, they're saying, since the Reagan administration, and probably even higher now. Moving Pompeo out of CIA over to Secretary of State after Tillerson left. All these things, it's a constantly moving thing, like you're watching a tennis match, the ball going back and forth and then bouncing out of the court. And it's pretty crazy. Some analysts, including AFP readers and others I've talked to, people whose opinions I respect, say that Trump is drawing with crooked lines, as it were, because of the media pounding on him so hard. He doesn't want to shoot straight because then it's too easy for the media to figure things out. So he's deliberately playing dodgeball with them for this reason. I don't totally buy that. It's plausible. It's an explanation. I don't know if it's a necessarily accurate one. It might explain part of it, but there's a lot going on there, and it's pretty hard to predict. What I was talking about with the liberal world order is largely the economic infrastructure. But yes, when you get into the military and foreign policy stuff, you're seeing something that is pretty tough to predict. He seems to be making peace with North Korea, or at least getting them to lean toward peace. He seems to go back and forth with Russia, and he's going back and forth on Syria. And of course, that involves Russia because Bashar al-Assad is an ally of Putin. So this is where things get pretty tough, and I don't have a hard, clear answer right now, except this concept of drawing straight with crooked lines to help confuse the media and keep them off his trail it's at least the beginning of an explanation for some of this administrative chaos we're seeing.
Well, we also know that Bilderberg is responsible for the formation of the European Union, and now, with things like Brexit looming, I'm sure that's still on the table for them. And now we have Theresa May of the UK going after Putin because of this Sergei Skripal poisoning debacle. And there's about 18 nations around the world who have begun pulling out diplomats, Russian diplomats from their countries, expelling them from their from their countries. Canada just got rid of 4 of them. How do you think this is going to play in geopolitically for the Bilderberg Group? I mean, it seems that Russia has been pinned as the new big bad boogeyman that everyone's supposed to be afraid of.
Well, to the extent that the Bilderberg Group involves the head of NATO, who is currently Jens Stoltenberg, and people that are involved in the military, you've got, several or at least a few generals there every year, and former heads of NATO and people like that, and people that run companies involved in aerospace and defense. Certainly they need conflict. The West always needs an enemy to keep the banker-backed empire going. Whether that enemy is absolutely real or not is maybe secondary, is to the fact that they have to be able to invoke an enemy. And certainly Russia fits that bill. Alexander Benesch, who's a German researcher with Recenter TV, he's cited the fact that there have been some Russian industrial interests connected to Bilderberg, at least a little bit over the years, and maybe they play both sides of the fence. But I think the easy answer, and it's not inaccurate just because it's easy, is that the military apparatus and the defense contractors that are involved with Bilderberg, they need to be able to invoke that enemy and keep the planes in the air and the ships in the sea, and keep that tension going, because that tension is what makes the empire go. That's what makes the one world system go. They play on fear, so they have to be able to invoke an enemy. Now, Putin is, I think, more or less a genuine foe of the West, but I think he's too smart, at least in most respects, to fall for their traps. Right now, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is always represented at Bilderberg, usually by Jessica Tuchman Matthews, who's on the American Friends of Bilderberg, they help finance the Bilderberg meetings. They just had a major program at the Carnegie Endowment on all the military and geopolitical strategies that are needed to keep Russia at bay. You know, how provocative should NATO be without being too provocative? How far should we go in protecting the Baltics without overplaying our hand? And this major analysis was just done, I want to say yesterday, certainly within the last 3 days at the Carnegie Endowment in Washington. So they're really analyzing it and looking at this as to how to handle Russia and also how to handle Russia's non-military overtures, be it so-called cyber attacks, be it alleged election meddling, and things that don't involve necessarily military posturing or military attacks. So evidently Bilderberg, with the defense and high-tech people there, are going to be looking through the Carnegie Endowment lens and deciding how to play their cards with regards to Russia. You know, how do they meet the Russian threat in the cyberspace, in the military realm, how not to overplay their hand, how to maximize their profits for the defense contractors. Of course, you know, defense has been involved a long time with Bilderberg. There was the founder of Bilderberg, Prince Bernhard, was involved in a debacle. I forget the name of the defense contractor, but it was a big scandal in the 1970s, 1976, the Lockheed scandal, I believe. Is that it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and so defense contracting. I'm trying to gather all my thoughts, combing through the decades here. Defense contracting has been a big thing with Bilderberg, a major element of its makeup, as you well know. So these are the different cylinders that this is all firing on. And myself, just like yourself, Dan, I'll be whittling this down. But what Richard Haass had to say to the Council on Foreign Relations, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, definitely tells their chief concerns that by the U.S. pulling out of the post-World War II Bretton Woods institutions, they feel they're going to have to find someone to make up for the slack that the U.S. creates when the U.S. either pulls back or decides it doesn't want to play anymore. Then there's the global cities movement, and we can talk about that. That's sort of like the underbelly of this top-down stuff. And the global cities movement has been prominent for Bilderberg at least since 2014 when they met in Denmark, and Kasim Reed, the former head of Atlanta, Georgia, was there, along with Bruce Katz of the Metropolitan Policy Program of the Brookings Institution. Brookings is always at Bilderberg. They spoke about some of the global cities program because Kasim Reed has been, and I believe still is, a leader in that program. And that, of course, is the idea of making the cities members of a global grid and basically diminishing the importance and authority of the nation state. And this is a more subterranean, underhanded way of undermining national sovereignty. While they got us focused on all these geopolitical things and the stuff that Richard Haass talked about to the House of Lords, they can keep working themselves in that area. And this is a big year for that. A major forum on global cities by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs is happening June 6th through 8th, right as Bilderberg is getting going, happening in Chicago. And that's in advance of climate cities and global cities programs in September in San Francisco. They had a major North American climate summit just this past December in Chicago, and it's all connecting together. It's all chain linked together, connecting to Agenda 2030, connecting to cities, finding partner cities like U.S. or Canadian cities would find partner cities in Europe to frame their global cities agendas with, and to make sure they meet up, to make sure they coordinate. And this is a major thing. This has been going on several years now, and a lot of issues seem to come and go. This one, Dan, seems to be a constant. It seems to hum along constantly, and it keeps increasing. And they openly talk about subnational actors, sub-state actors, global cities, smart cities, resilient cities, feminist cities, all these monikers, all these adjectives. But the consistent thing about it is they all openly state that they want to take on more foreign policy power, more immunity from the nation state, so they can become sanctuary cities and become a haven or sanctuary for illegal migrants, and so on and so forth. So the Chatham House, I'll add this, I know this is a lot to take in, just in February 15th, actually had a program there in the UK. They're the counterpart of the CFR, where they actually said cities should have their own foreign policy. And then they talk about how, like in a city, normally in our society, different institutions like universities and city hall and corporations and banks have all been siloed. In other words, they all have their own little separate spheres of power. Well, now the Chatham House, which had the Chicago Council on Global Affairs president, Ivo Daalder, a former ambassador to NATO, they invited him to the Chatham House program for the foreign policy of cities. And then they talked about in advance how these siloed, self-contained units of power, universities, banks, and so on, City Hall, would no longer be able to segregate their powers. They would have to blend their powers and overlap. So there's something pretty, shall I say, subversive going on here, where they want to abandon the nation state one city at a time.
It sounds to me like it's power being shifted into fewer and fewer and fewer hands. Your classic pyramidal structure with all the power at the top and less as you go down, permeating out throughout society. And like you said, it's like 2030 on steroids, formerly Agenda 21. And that's what it's all about, is creating this incremental step towards the formation of a one world government and the new world order. So I'm also curious about, we talked a little bit about the technical side of things, but I fear there's also some economical warfare in the near future. A lot of people talk about the crashing of the dollar being blamed on Trump potentially, and of course now we have cryptocurrencies having a huge year in 2017. So what do you think their agenda is in regards to that? Is this a thorn in the side, or perhaps something that can be usurped and steered into a direction that's going to give them more control?
They're probably capable eventually of usurping it and steering it. I'm not as up to speed on the crypto issues as I'd like to be, Dan. I've been immersed a lot in the the global cities part of this, again, because of its constancy, because that's one of the issues that just keeps going and ascending ever higher and continuing to broaden out, and it doesn't seem to let up. It only seems to increase. The issue you raised, by its very nature, like some of the foreign policy matters we mentioned a few minutes ago, is up and down. It's all over the place, and it's a moving target and a little harder to track. And so I can't really give you an intelligent answer on that one, other than knowing that they could, usurp that and steer that their way if they try hard enough. But the reason they would do that would be evidently so it would not become a thorn in their side. But ultimately, Bilderberg, like any of these power groups, is built on the monopoly of credit that the central banking system has established over the last 200 or 300 years. Think of it as like a playing field. You and I and all of us live on this grid. They establish a certain monopoly of credit, a certain banking grid, and no matter what we try and do, they control the infrastructure. Now, we might have alternative viewpoints, alternative media. We all have different ideas, solutions. But as long as they control that financial grid, that infrastructure, then we're always playing on their turf, their monopoly of credit. So ultimately, to bring Bilderberg to bear, there has to be monetary reform and a breaking of that monopoly of credit. And if the cryptocurrencies were to become a tool of breaking that monopoly of credit and didn't become usurped by the wrong people, then maybe it would reset. I'm trying to find the right words. It would re-engineer that playing field to where there's no longer this usurious monopoly of credit that gives them the automatic home field advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be crucial moving forward. And it's tough to say, what their insight is into it or involvement. I put out a video a little while ago showing the fact that Peter Thiel, who was once just an attendee, now he's a lot more involved. I believe on the steering committee, was essentially instrumental in the formation of the cryptocurrency Ethereum by giving Vitalik Buterin, the creator of it, a $100,000 grant to kick the project off. And I believe he's heavily invested in Bitcoin as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and what their plans are there. So I guess just to kind of wrap it up, any kind of final thoughts on what you think we need to be thinking about moving forward? I mean, this is only a couple more months away. It seems like it is going to be in Italy for sure, whether it's in Venice or Turin. But moving forward, are you planning on going this year? And any final thoughts on what we need to do to prepare?
Yeah, I certainly do intend to be there. I'm pretty sure that's going to work out. I think the final thoughts in part, Dan, would include what we've talked about. Let's watch what Trump does on NAFTA. And of course, your home country's pretty miffed about some of his overtures on that. Watch what he does on WTO. Will he stay out of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Hopefully that wasn't just a bunch of shadow boxing. And of the Paris Agreement, the climate agreement, watch what he does on that, precisely because the CFR, being long tied to Bilderberg, is very concerned about what Trump's going to do on that. So that's a big one to watch for. Other than that, I think it's a matter of course, watching the Global Cities movement, because that has all the Bilderberg-related network members, the Carnegie Endowment, Brookings, CFR, everybody involved, Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Everybody's at the table on Global Cities. They're really pushing hard there. Anything about that's going to be important. Other than that, I think we're just going to have to wait and see how things work out. The point you made about Peter Thiel and cryptocurrencies is a good point. Him being on the steering committee, and watch what news might come out about those. But Bilderberg, I think, is entering its 66th meeting, if I'm remembering right, without looking it up. I think last year, was their 65th time. And it's just going to be interesting. But those are really the main points that I've been following. And anything else, I think, is an educated guess at best.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're kind of often left to speculate, which as journalists you don't usually like to do, but when it comes to Bilderberg, without them printing the minutes of the meetings and being so secretive, that's why we go, to try to find out the discrepancies in the list, and to try to get a better grasp on what the actual agendas are, because they're setting foreign policy and making decisions that are going to affect people all over the world. So it's of the utmost importance. So I'm certainly going to be there as well, whether it's in Turin or Venice. I'm sure we'll figure that out soon. So I definitely hope to see you there. Let people know where they can find you if they want to learn more from you.
Well, AmericanFreePress.net or thetruthhound.com or Steemit.com, STEEMIT.com /@truthhound. And I run under the moniker Stop the Press's News. I have my own brand as well. And that's where you can find me, along with AmericanFreePress.net. And yeah, Dan, I look forward to seeing you there. I'm pretty sure it'll work out for me to be there. Sometimes the travel expenses can be a little nasty, but I'm working on minimizing that, like we all do. And always look forward to seeing you and Luke Radowski there. We always collaborate, have a great time. But I think some other thoughts are that the fact that Bilderberg has a lot of members around the country that operate in their official capacity. And I think it might behoove some of us to talk to them before they get to Bilderberg in their official capacities, and find out on a more individual basis what they might have to say about this. Because, it's getting harder and harder to keep things secret, and the social media camera on every iPhone and cell phone world that we live in. So it's not like it was in the old days when Jim Tucker and Westbrook Pegler, respectively, were first seeing Bilderberg meet back in the typewriter days. It's a lot harder for them to keep things absolutely secret. So, there's a lot more pressure being brought to bear for them to be more transparent. That's why they created a BilderbergMeetings.org website about 10, 12 years ago. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they'll open up a little more. They never have given us a press conference, but talking to them individually might be a way to do this and to see what they're up to. But we'll see. I think it's reaching a turning point where some of their deliberations might be delegated to other bodies that maybe we're not totally aware of yet. But Bilderberg is still important. They've kept it going. You would have thought they'd cash in, throw in the towel by now, because their main thing was to form the basis of the European Union and to nurture that along, as some of the former members did admit. And I don't know how many former members that don't attend anymore might still be alive that might give us a little insight. That's a little difficult to say. But at any rate, thanks for having me on. And it should be a very interesting time, like usual.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what you suggested there with kind of preemptively contacting some of these guys is a great idea. I managed to get the contact of a Bilderberger last year who was an Italian journalist, Maurizio Morino or something like that. I can't recall the name off the top of my head. But I'm going to be reaching out to him because I have his contact info, and he is in Italy. So I think that's a great way to do it. And as you said, these trips can get quite expensive. So I strongly encourage people to check you out on Steemit. We'll have your Steemit link below, and hopefully if you get enough upvotes, you'll start making a little more of that SBD, and hopefully that can help cover the costs. It costs a lot for me as well. That's why we produce films. You mentioned this is a turning point. Well, I made a documentary film called The Turning Point. I have a copy right here. So if people want to support my efforts, you check out the film, get it on DVD. We've made a lot of behind the scenes, the making of, the making of the soundtrack. We even have a hidden little Easter egg on there, which if you happen to find it, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. So on that note, Mark, once again, thanks so much for joining us. And I'm sure I'll see you in a couple months, and we'll have all the links located below.
Well, great, Dan, and I'll look forward to seeing Turning Point. Thanks for having me on today.
Take care.
You too.